Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Behavior Code, a practical guide to understanding and teaching the most challenging students. By Jessica Minahan and Nancy Rappaport, MD. Narrated by Gina Rogers. Publisher's Note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to figures, appendices, and tables present in the print and ebook formats of the book. Introduction. About 10% of the school population, or 9 to 13 million children, struggle with mental health problems. In a typical classroom of 20, chances are good that 1 or 2 students are dealing with serious psychosocial stressors relating to poverty, domestic violence, abuse and neglect, or a psychiatric disorder. There is also growing evidence that the number of children suffering the effects of trauma and those with autism-related social deficits is also on the rise. These children represent the most challenging students in our classrooms today. Their mental health problems make it difficult for them to regulate their emotions and focus on learning. Most of the time, they lack basic skills necessary to regulate their behaviors, and sometimes to even recognize their own actions. They can be inflexible and have outbursts for no apparent reason, disrupting the classroom routine daily. They can disengage socially or be clingy, sleepy, or irritable. They can defy school personnel repeatedly and argue incessantly. Sometimes, although more rarely, they make sexual gestures and exhibit other forms of sexually inappropriate behavior. They are the students who keep administrators up at night and the ones teachers fear and even dread having in their classes. Many of their stories are heartbreaking. Despite their best efforts, school providers do not always do a good job with these students. Children with behavioral challenges often fail in school, waste too much time in detentions and suspensions, fall years behind in academics, and never master the skills they need to make adequate progress. Although schools have become a major site for students to receive mental health interventions over the past 30 years, school programs are still relatively fragmented. Counselors and teachers lack adequate time and resources to provide evidence-based curricula and classroom strategies that, when consistently delivered, can change students' behavior. School psychologists are often relegated to testing students, creating individual education programs, IEPs, and dealing with bureaucratic demands of students in special education. School counselors have a high caseload and must devote the majority of their time to students categorized with the most severe emotional and behavioral disturbances. One result is that disruptive students are frequently referred for psychiatric medication before comprehensive and effective behavioral plans have been attempted. Teachers are often ill-equipped to respond to students' challenging behaviors. These educators receive minimal training in child and adolescent mental health issues, or to develop interventions that can help reduce behavioral incidents and increase access to the curriculum. The usual methods, such as sticker charts with an emphasis on students' performance to gain rewards, or sending the students to the principal's office, usually fall flat with these students. School staff today are under enormous pressure to show progress for every student every year, yet they are in a bind. One disruptive child can effectively derail an entire lesson. Teachers recognize their own problems in dealing with disruptive students and often have little confidence in how to change the trajectory of the student. Surveys show that coping with disruptive students is teachers' #1 problem. Without effective behavior intervention plans, staff often feel they must choose between the risky route of putting academic demands on these students and the path of least resistance, that is, minimizing academic demands to avoid the students becoming more disruptive. Teachers do not need to make this choice. For 30 years combined, we have worked as consultants helping teachers and other school personnel to work with the most disruptive and difficult-to-reach students. We have helped administrators, teachers, and other school staff in many schools to create behavior intervention plans that combine an understanding of child psychological disorders with research-based behavior modification strategies. We share a common philosophy that these hard-to-reach students are not meeting their potential, and that it is crucial to support schools and teachers in their efforts to productively and successfully engage these students. Based on consultation experience, we apply both clinical and behavioral theory into practical strategies that in many cases keep students from being placed out of district or in self-contained classrooms, and that reduce or eliminate their inappropriate behaviors. In this book, we provide the conceptual background for breaking the code of what we believe are the four most challenging students in the classroom: students with anxiety-related, oppositional, withdrawn, and sexualized behaviors. We focus on students in K through 6 for several important reasons. First, elementary teachers are working in more inclusive environments than teachers of older students. Consequently, K through 6 teachers particularly need support. Second, early intervention and school success is essential for these younger students. The longer students exhibit inappropriate behavior, the less likely they are to improve. Third, older students are often identified as having a diagnosis that then allows them access to specialized support services. Our experience in schools has taught us that to be effective and help each student reach his or her potential, teachers need a new approach to clearly understand what drives student behavior. Teachers also need a variety of strategies that allow them to intervene effectively before the behavior is entrenched. We include possible causes for these behaviors to help teachers understand the student's behavior and decipher patterns on the part of both students and staff that will help these educators choose strategies that can often change students' behavior dramatically. We have included some of the students' stories in this book because it is important to maintain hope for these children when it can seem as if their problems will never get better. Building on an understanding of what drives behavior, we provide a framework for a different kind of behavioral intervention plan that we call the FAIR plan, for functional hypothesis, accommodations, interaction strategies, and response strategies. Unlike typical behavior intervention plans, FAIR takes our deep clinical understanding and knowledge of multidisciplinary research and best practices for these students and applies them within a behavioral construct. Traditional approaches don't take into account an understanding of mental health and the student's skill deficits contributing to the behavior. Through the FAIR plan, we spell out the best ways to intervene and support students with the 4 types of challenging behaviors. The letters in FAIR represent the 4 components of a behavior intervention plan. With a functional hypothesis and antecedent analysis, teachers document behaviors and make a hypothesis about what the student is communicating through his or her behavior and what in the environment could be a catalyst for the behavior. Accommodations need to be in place to help the student function better. Interaction strategies will promote desired behavior, and response strategies may be considered if prevention efforts fail. As may be obvious, we use the acronym FAIR for a philosophical reason as well. We believe strongly that without more effective behavioral support like the FAIR plan, these most challenging students don't have and won't have a chance to learn their potentials in our schools. The FAIR plan is a flexible, empathetic, and practical approach that puts a primary emphasis on preventing inappropriate, disruptive, or uncooperative behaviors before they occur. It also emphasizes strategies for teaching the skills that students need in order to behave appropriately in school. Our method also requires school staff to consider how their responses may unintentionally encourage students to continue their inappropriate, unproductive behaviors. FAIR plans are best used and adapted for students in consultation or collaboration with school and outside personnel. Appropriate professionals may include psychologists, social workers, inclusion specialists, behavior analysts, and child psychiatrists. Mental health evaluation is a necessary component for many of these students with behavioral problems in the classroom. However, many teachers work in schools without adequate professional support. Indeed, this lack of support is a major reason why we decided to write this book. We wanted teachers who may not have access to child psychiatrists and behavioral analysts to benefit from the lessons we have learned about what makes a difference with these students. We have constructed the FAIR plan so that it can be used as a behavior intervention plan for students both in special education and in regular education. The early chapters in this book are meant to lay a foundation for understanding the remainder of the book. In Chapter 1, we discuss the fundamental concepts that drive behavior in general, as well as inappropriate behavior in children. In Chapter 2, we introduce the conceptual steps that teachers will use to construct a FAIR plan and a simple, concrete way of documenting patterns needed to begin to put together a plan for each child. We also explain the individual components of a FAIR plan. We dedicate chapters 3 through 6 for each of the 4 challenging behaviors and examine the various ways these types of students present in schools. In each of these chapters, we offer a brief overview of relevant psychiatric diagnoses. We then provide strategies to intervene with each category of behavior. Because some of these strategies can be used for several of the behaviors we discuss, we have located particular strategies in the chapter where they are most pertinent. For example, we discuss how to manage transitions and how to encourage self-monitoring in the chapter on students with anxiety-related behaviors, as they can particularly benefit from these strategies. These practices can be helpful for other students too. At the end of each of these chapters, we provide a template of a FAIR plan tailored for each behavior addressed in the chapter. Teachers can use these templates to construct FAIR plans for their own students. Chapter 7 answers some commonly asked questions that school staff have posed to us over the years as we have worked with them to implement this approach. At the end of the book, we have included numerous appendices devoted to resources that teachers can also customize to implement some of the strategies in the FAIR plans. Finally, a few words about terminology. Although much of this book is addressed to teachers, this book can be used by anyone in the classroom, no matter what his or her position. For example, inclusion aides, classroom assistants, interns. This book is also aimed at general education teachers in inclusive settings, special education teachers in self-contained classrooms, and educational and clinical specialists and administrators consulting to teachers. Everyone can learn to change behavior. You do not have to be a seasoned therapist or be able to prescribe medication. The behavioral approach is an incredibly effective research-based methodology that school staff can do, and can do well. We also use the terms school counselor, school mental health clinician, and school social worker interchangeably throughout the book, recognizing that schools have a variety of mental health clinicians who provide therapeutic support for students. When we refer to the student's team throughout the book, we are referring to both the IEP team in the case of a student receiving special education services and the larger school team. For example, mental health staff and administrators, for students not receiving special education. Parents are a member of both types of teams. We use the pronoun we throughout the book for ease of listening, even though we sometimes may be describing the clinical experiences of only one of us, either Jessica or Nancy alone. As a convenience, we use the pronouns he and she interchangeably throughout this book when referring to a generic student. The students who are named in this book represent composites of students from our practice, and while many of the patterns of behavior are real, any resemblance to a particular student we have treated is purely coincidental. We are excited to offer the practical strategies outlined in the FAIR plans. These strategies are a product of our years of working with the most challenging students in the moment. Even in schools cramped for space, classrooms with large student-to-teacher ratios, and with students who have burned bridges with the school. Every day, we are amazed by how much effort it can require to see improvement in a child who is struggling with challenging behavior. Even as seasoned clinicians, we find that having a systematic approach helps ground us and give us momentum. As we constructed and distilled these FAIR plans from what we hope is our cumulative wisdom, we had a fierce desire that teachers not be left alone. Without an effective plan to change these challenging behaviors, the students and the teachers will ultimately pay a substantial cost. Chapter 1. Breaking the Code. What teachers need to know about behavior. Students with emotional and behavioral challenges are performing poorly both academically and behaviorally in our schools. One recent study found that these students made no significant progress in reading, math, or behavior over the course of a full school year, whether they were in a special education or full inclusion classroom. They are more likely than students with other disabilities to be suspended for a long period, and more likely to change teachers, classes, and schools than their disabled and non-disabled peers. Not surprisingly, the outcomes for these students are bleak. In 2006 to 2007, only 20% of students with emotional and behavioral disturbance, EBD, ages 14 to 21, who exited the school system received a high school diploma. Of students with EBD, 48% drop out of grades 9 through 12, as opposed to 30% of all students with disabilities and 24% of all high school students. After high school, only 30% of students with EBD were employed, and what's worse, 58% had been arrested. However, if the classroom is set up to promote their success, these students and other challenging students who have similar behaviors but may not have individual education programs, IEPs, can improve their performance in school and succeed. We have seen many students who were discouraged and considered lost causes turn around and thrive in the classroom with the strategies described in this book. It is our responsibility as educators to reach these students and provide the support and opportunity they need to successfully learn and achieve. In this chapter, we will lay out the fundamental concepts that will help teachers to understand the behavior of even their most challenging students. In the next chapter, we will show teachers how to construct a FAIR plan that will put students on a more productive path. In doing so, we hope to demystify behavior and give teachers a concrete framework they can use to solve problems productively and intervene effectively. Our perspective is that all teachers who are willing to be behavior detectives can learn how to identify why challenging students behave a certain way, what school factors contribute to the behavior, and what strategies will lead to a more appropriate, constructive behavior for school and for life. Why challenging students are so challenging. When intervening with students during a busy school day, teachers often make instantaneous assessments of why a student acted a certain way, and the educators then respond according to their assumptions. When a student acts inappropriately, it is also common for teachers to pull that student aside to explain or to coach the child on how to behave better next time. These quick responses work with most students because their behavior seems logical and fits with common patterns that are easy to recognize and anticipate. Most students have the fundamental skills that are required to act appropriately, so with help and support, they are capable of self-correcting. With challenging students, however, the intent of the behavior can be unclear and confusing to teachers and does not necessarily fit into known patterns. Teachers can also overestimate a student's ability to behave in a given moment. After many years of consulting with school personnel, we have learned that students who are anxious, oppositional, or withdrawn, or who demonstrate sexualized behavior, can be especially baffling to even the most experienced teachers and specialists. The difficult reality is that teachers are often called upon to react quickly to a behavior, even when they do not understand it. If a student is racing out of the school building or screaming in the cafeteria, teachers need to respond immediately to control the situation. However, making an incorrect assumption, which is so easy to do with our most challenging students, can lead to an inadequate response and repetition of the behavior. For example, one day, Jimmy, a second-grade student, pushed Devin off the computer. When the teacher saw this, she assumed Jimmy pushed Devin to get a turn on the computer faster. Her logical response, based on this assessment, was to ban Jimmy from using the computer for the remainder of the day. Although it wasn't obvious at that moment, after she looked at patterns of Jimmy's behavior over time, his pattern of aggressiveness toward Devin during social times, and picking him as his partner during science and physical education time, the teacher realized that rather than pushing Devin to get a turn on the computer, as she had assumed, Jimmy was trying to engage Devin socially. Banning Jimmy from the computer was not a response that encouraged Jimmy to learn more appropriate ways of interacting with peers. Instead, it punished him for his failed attempt to interact with the other students. The teacher's response and the reason for Jimmy's behavior were mismatched, and therefore the intervention was ineffective. Interpreting behavior and understanding the motivation behind it can be difficult. We find it helpful to tell teachers that challenging behavior can often be counterintuitive. For example, a child wants to make a friend, but does so by pushing a classmate off a chair. Or, as we discuss later on, some children seek any kind of attention, even if it means provoking teachers to yell at them. In addition to the counterintuitive nature of students' challenging behavior, it is also often unexpected. Teachers tell us that the most frustrating aspect is that such behavior seems to come out of the blue or for no clear reason. Take the case of Susan, a kindergartner with Asperger's syndrome. Susan was beginning to line up for chorus with her class when she rushed over to the reading nook area, where Brendan was sleeping on the beanbag chair. Susan yelled, "Why is he sleeping? Wake him up! Wake him up!" and then lunged toward Brendan. The surprised teacher, Ms. Rogers, separated them so that Brendan wouldn't be hurt. As a response, Ms. Rogers revoked Susan's reward time on the computer and took her to the principal's office to call her mother. Ms. Rogers explained to Susan that it's okay if sometimes students are tired and sleep in school. The teacher's assumption was that a student doing something out of the norm disturbed Susan, who, like many students with Asperger's syndrome, is very rule-oriented. However, when questioned about the incident hours later, Susan remarked, "He can't sleep there. I need it after chorus." As it turns out, Susan was afraid that Brendan would sleep too long in the beanbag and that it would not be available for her after chorus, when she would use it for a calming break. Once Ms. Rogers had this information, she was able to appropriately develop a Plan B with Susan. If the reading nook area wasn't available for her calming breaks, Susan could use a nearby office. This plan was written on the bottom of Susan's daily schedule posted on her desk, helping to relieve her anxiety. Ms. Rogers' initial response to the behavior, explaining why some students sleep at school, was based on the incorrect assumption that Susan was upset that a student was doing something out of the norm. Therefore, Ms. Rogers' response might not have prevented Susan's behavior from occurring the next time the child saw another student resting on the beanbag chair. Understanding the reason for Susan's behavior and offering the appropriate intervention helped to relieve Susan's anxiety and potentially eliminated a future outburst. In addition to the student's behavior being counterintuitive because of confusing and unpredictable reasons for the behavior, some challenging students may have inconsistent or under-recognized difficulty in performing a skill. Even when teachers do correctly assess the intent of a student's behavior, their instincts can still fail them when teaching the student a more appropriate alternative behavior. When students act inappropriately, it is the job of the teachers to teach them a suitable replacement behavior. For example, instead of pushing, you need to ask for a turn. If the replacement strategy being taught is too difficult for the student to master, these interventions fail. Teachers never knowingly ask or expect a student to do something that he or she cannot do. However, at a given moment, what the student is able to do or understand can be unclear or inconsistent to the teacher. Students with trauma histories, impulsivity, oppositional or inflexible behavior, depression, or anxiety can fluctuate in performance and ability according to their current internal state. Teachers can believe that students are more capable than they actually are at a given moment, thinking, "I don't know why he's flipping out while playing the recorder. He wasn't bothered by the noise yesterday." Or, "She wrote 3 pages last week and now she isn't even writing a sentence. She's just being lazy." These complicated students can also have an uneven profile, where sometimes they are sophisticated and age-appropriate, yet at other times they can't complete simple tasks that a much younger child can do. For example, a student may be very socially savvy and charming in conversations with teachers, but have a tantrum over not getting the blue marker during art class. This inconsistency can lead a teacher to have unrealistic expectations for the student. Ms. Lombardi, a seasoned physical education teacher, accidentally picked an intervention that was too difficult for her 5th-grade student. Ms. Lombardi had been teaching Goran since he was in kindergarten, so she was confident she got him. Even though he had trouble in the classroom because of his frequent interruptions and impulsivity, he was doing well in PE. On the first day of the ropes unit, Ms. Lombardi had the students buddy up and take turns on each of the stations. She paired Goran with Julia. Usually, partners alternated between going first and second at each station. At the first station, Goran was excited to be able to climb the ropes before Julia. When it was time for Goran and Julia to go to the second station, where they would swing with a rope over an obstacle, Goran started yelling and punching the floor mat. Ms. Lombardi rushed over to ask what was happening. Julia shrugged her shoulders, saying, "I didn't do anything." Ms. Lombardi asked, "Was it your turn to go first, Julia?" Julia nodded. Ms. Lombardi knew that Goran had trouble taking turns. She guessed correctly that Goran had an outburst because he couldn't go first at this station. Ms. Lombardi explained to Goran that he had gone first on the last station and that it was Julia's turn. She told him he could wait right next to the rope for his turn. As Julia was about to grab the rope, Goran stole it and swung it away from her, hitting a nearby student in the head. Ms. Lombardi sent him to the office for the first time all year. Ms. Lombardi assessed the reason for Goran's outburst correctly, but her intervention was unsuccessful. She knew that Goran had trouble taking turns and that usually reminding him to take turns did the trick. Because Goran was so excited about the ropes course and was so revved up, he was not able to wait near the rope without touching it. Reminding him to wait was unsuccessful because at that moment he was especially impulsive and could not control his behavior as he had done in previous classes. In our consultation with Ms. Lombardi, she realized that Goran needed an accommodation to help him be patient during such a motivating activity, because of his limited impulse control in that situation. After consulting with us, she had a plan that when it was his partner's turn to go first for a highly motivating activity, she had him do push-up and sit-up contests with other students who were waiting in the corner of the gym. This was successful because he was busy and far from the rope station, a situation that decreased his chances of acting impulsively. Table 1.1 shows how the intuitive process that teachers often use for responding to behavior does not work with hard-to-reach students like Goran. Essential concepts for understanding behavior.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?